Hi, I'm Tiffany. Welcome to Towering TBR. This is going to be my late October wrap-up. I had some very challenging health days, so I'm a little bit late in getting this up, but I had a pretty decent month and wanted to tell you what I read. I read 11 books and DNF 2. One of the books was absolutely hysterical. I laughed out loud so many times. One of the books was such a huge disappointment and made me really reconsider ever reading something from them again. And one of the books was dripping with so much misogyny, I wanted to throw it across the room. So let's talk about them. We'll get into the DNFs first. I DNF'd Triangle, The Fire That Changed America by David Von Drehle. This is supposed to be about the infamous Shirtwaist Triangle factory fire, which killed 146 workers. This fire is what spurred safety laws and unions to crop up. However, the author zooms in way too closely and starts looking at individual corrupt politicians. And 30 pages in, we hadn't even gotten to the fire yet. So I was just not in the right mood to read this, and it was just much more detailed than I was actually interested in. I do own this, so I may give it a try again down the road, but yeah, DNF'd. The second DNF was Nothing Is Wrong and Here's Why by Alexandria Petri. This was supposed to be satirical essays focusing on U.S. politics and specifically Donald Trump. I love skewering humorous satire, but after 3 essays, this really read more like Donald Trump fan fiction, and honestly, I couldn't stomach it, so it is going back to the library. I picked up Garlic and the Witch by Bree Paulsen. This is the second book in the duology. We follow Garlic as she's living in the garden and she goes on some errands. There's really hardly no conflict in this, so it didn't really feel like a story. It just sort of felt like a slice of life type, very low stakes, very mundane. Yeah, I gave it 3 stars because I like the artwork, but I wish there had been more story. Then I accidentally picked up a horror comic. If you're new here, I don't really like horror. It is one of the only genres I really don't read. However, I saw the artwork and picked it up. I picked up Rain by Joe Hill. Yeah. If I would have noticed who wrote it, I would have probably figured out it was horror. Joe Hill is Stephen King's son, who also writes horror. And this was adapted from one of his novellas. We follow these 2 women as they're moving in together, and all of a sudden a rain starts to fall. Except for this is not rain made out of water. This is rain made out of like crystals and glass, and it is more like nails and needles falling, and obviously kills lots of people, including the partner that the woman was moving in with. So this was really just kind of a depiction of grief and existing in this kind of post-apocalyptic type world where rain is not safe. I gave it 4 stars. I actually really enjoyed the story. I will say, though, it does get very gory, which I did not really appreciate. I will definitely make sure to include some photos that are not as gory. And the last illustrated thing I read was Everything is an Emergency by Jason Adam Kazenstein. This is his graphic memoir talking about when he was diagnosed with OCD. So we start out early, and he's a young boy, and he's had a nightmare, and his father says, oh, well, flip over your pillow, and then when you lay back down, you'll go into like a new dream. You won't have the nightmare. And that's like his first compulsion that he does in his attempt to control the world. OCD, I learned, is very much about control. You get these thoughts that something bad is going to happen, and you have to do something, whatever the compulsion is, to prevent that from happening. It's a way of trying to establish control. It gets so bad that he basically can't leave his room, and he finally seeks help. He starts going to a therapist who has him do exposure therapy. He describes it as poking a bear and then realizing that the bear is not going to harm you. He had to retrain his brain to know that the things he was afraid of were not realistic to be that afraid of. And as he starts to get better, he gets on meds, and he starts drawing comics. And there's one I really enjoyed. It says, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him medium well. And I really liked that one. I thought that was funny. So I really enjoyed this, gave it 4 stars. And if anybody else knows of mental health graphic memoirs that they'd recommend, link them down in the comments because it was great and I'm always looking for more. Okay, so the book I mentioned that was a huge disappointment was The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Nayler. I had such high hopes for this, and I only gave it 3 stars. My first problem with it was there was way too many perspectives. We start out the chapter and we're following this guy, and by the end of the chapter, he's murdered. And then we go to some scientists with an AI, and they are learning how to communicate with sentient octopuses. That was the good part. All of the parts that focused with the challenges and how difficult it is to communicate with a species who isn't human. So much of our language and communication is based on human experience and human features, and trying to find ways to communicate those ideas to a being that doesn't have a human figure and human experiences was very difficult, and that was the good part of the book. But after that chapter, we would go to like a chapter on a slave ship, and people were dying, and I eventually saw what the author was trying to do. They were trying to build a sense of dread, but I just didn't care. Like, because these characters kept dying, and we only knew them for a chapter or 2, really at most, I just didn't care, and I just wanted to get back to the main story with these scientists. It had some interesting ideas, but this execution was messy and not very enjoyable. He has another book coming out next year, and I will consider picking it up if it gets rave reviews, but this was definitely a miss for me. Another science fiction that was only slightly better was The Story of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. Yeah, this was also quite disappointing. I really loved his first collection, Exhalation. I connected with the stories much better. There are 8 stories in this book, and I rated them individually, and the average was a 3.25. There's a lot of religious themes and a lot of math, so maybe if that interests you, this might be the right collection for you. There were some really great standout stories. My favorites were Understand, Hell is the Absence of God, and Liking What You See. Those were my favorites. The titular story, The Story of Your Life and Others, is what they made the movie Arrival from. And controversial opinion, I like the movie better. This was interesting, but I think that the movie got into concepts. They were able to develop the concepts more. So I really like that. If anybody has any recommendations for short story collections that are like all hits, or like most of them are hits, definitely recommend them, because there were some great ones and then there were some really terrible ones, and I'm always hesitant to pick up short stories because I don't think I'm gonna like everything. If you guessed the one dripping with misogyny was the classic Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, you were right. So the premise is that this sleepy English town has a silver object mysteriously appear and put everybody into a sleep. The next morning, the silver object is gone, and all of the women are pregnant. But of course, the men have to complain how difficult it is on them. The doctor is like, oh, I've got so many pregnant patients, it's such a nightmare. The men are like, I don't want to raise these children that aren't my own. And nobody really thinks about the women who are in obviously the worst predicament, especially in this age when unmarried women were pregnant as well, and reputation was such an important thing back then. Women definitely had it harder in this situation. In fact, it was so over the top, I kind of thought maybe he was doing that to be overt and subversive, but I mean, it was written in the 50s, so I couldn't find whether or not he had all of this misogyny on purpose or not. I will say he was great at creating this sense of dread, this creeping, unsettling feeling when the children are born and then it's obvious that they are not fully human. It was very creepy. The writing was excellent with the exception of the misogyny, and part of me is just hoping that he did that on purpose for some reason. I'm not sure. It made a lot of the characters very unlikable, though. I've read this and The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. Where should I go next? I really like his writing. So yeah, if you're a John Wyndham fan and you have one to recommend, let me know in the comments down below. I buddy read The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters with Jennifer from Jennifer Loves Books. I will link her down in the description below. Definitely check her out. This is the 4th Sarah Waters book I've read, and this was great to read in October. It was so creepy, unsettling, and yeah, it just was the right time to read this book. So we follow the perspective of a local doctor. He is called out to this creepy old house because the maid is complaining of stomach pain. He quickly finds out that she is faking it because she wants to leave this creepy house. She's very unhappy living in this creepy place, and from that, he gets very enamored with this house and the residents who live there. It is a mother and her 2 adult children living in this home, and he gets more and more wrapped up with them and this house. The house is creepy and seems to be causing really spooky stuff happening. Like a dog just gets upset and bites someone for apparently no reason. There are these creepy drawings that are appearing. There are unsettling noises. One person is convinced the house is haunted and they go mad. Very atmospheric. The ending is a bit open-ended, which I wasn't a big fan of, but when I went down a Wikipedia hole looking at interviews with the author, she does elaborate a little bit more on the ending, and I was much more satisfied after I did that. I gave this 4 stars. I still have 2 Sarah Waters books to read. She needs to put something else out because I'm almost done with her stuff and I need more. I don't really think of myself as a seasonal reader, but I was in the mood for spooky and I decided to pick up Weyward by Emilia Hart. So this focuses on 3 women in 3 different time periods. So this focuses on a teen girl who is accused of witchcraft in the 1600s. There is a young girl in the 1940s who is much more obsessed with science than with men and propriety. And there's a 2019 timeline where a woman is escaping from an abusive relationship. I will say that I was much more interested in the most recent timeline in the beginning. I just felt like it was more interesting. But over time, I really started to connect with all 3 of the characters, and I really liked all of the time we spent in the 3 timelines. If you want strong women navigating difficult situations, this is the book for you, especially with witchy vibes. I was then able to get Iris Kelly Doesn't Date by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a highly anticipated romance, which is not a thing I normally say. I'm not a huge romance reader. But I really enjoyed the first one in this series, Delilah Green Doesn't Care, and was excited to pick up this 3rd installment. So we focus on 2 women. They go on what is a disastrous first date and then reconnect during a play. And they decide to fake date for various reasons. And one of the characters has general anxiety disorder. And I will say that the writing for anxiety was super authentic feeling. Like I was anxious for the character in some of the situations she was in. So if that's triggering for you, keep that in mind, because this definitely made me feel like secondhand anxiety. There was kind of a lazy miscommunication trope towards the end, but it also somewhat felt plausible because the character had anxiety and didn't want to bring up a subject that was going to make her anxious. So I kind of get it. I gave it 4 stars. It was a fun read. I enjoyed my time with it. And I would recommend if you like sapphic love stories. So if you remember in the beginning, I said there was a book that made me laugh hysterically. That book was Starter Villain by John Scalzi. I love John Scalzi. So this book made me laugh out loud so many times that my husband on the different floor to me in the house had to come check on me because he thought I was crying. I was laughing so hard. And yeah, I was crying because I was laughing so hard. It was just laugh out loud, fun romp, exactly what I needed at the time. So the premise is a man called Charlie. He doesn't have really anything going on in his life. He's just kind of a substitute teacher. He lives in a house that really kind of belongs to his siblings. And all of a sudden he finds out that he is the heir to his billionaire uncle. After his uncle dies, he inherits everything, including a private underground lair underneath a volcano, cross-species minions, and arch enemies as well. He is put in so many funny situations, and I just couldn't help but laugh out loud so many times. Will Wheaton narrates the audiobook. He does almost all of John Scalzi's books. And I will say I was envisioning Charlie as basically Will Wheaton, but I had such a good time with it. I would recommend it to anybody who likes funny stories and stories with some absurd humor. I loved all the cat craziness as well. I gave it 4 stars and highly recommend. I'm going to end on the best rated book, which was Witchlings by Clara A. Ortega. This is a middle grade fantasy following this young girl called Seven. She is 12 and she is about to be sorted into a coven. There are 5 covens, and with the amount of students, there are going to be 3 spares, which means that they're going to form their own coven. They don't belong to one of the pre-existing ones. And it's probably no surprise that Seven ends up being a spare. Not only is she a spare, but also a girl who bullies her and a new girl she hasn't really met yet. As they're about to seal the covens, she's upset. She doesn't accept this, and so she cannot be sealed in the coven, which means she's going to stay a witchling forever and not come fully into her witch powers. However, there's a loophole. If she does the impossible task and unites with her coven, and then they can be sealed as a coven. They are given the impossible task and the deadline for when the impossible task must be done, and if they are not able to complete it, they will be turned into toads. The rest of the story were part spooky and part mystical and whimsical. It was a really fun time. I enjoyed these characters. The themes of friendship and belonging and the exquisite world building that the author does for this magical world was just quite a delight. I have heard that there's a sequel, and I'm interested in picking it up. If you have read it, let me know if it's any good. So that's it. That's the 11 books I read this month, plus the 2 DNFs. What did you read in the month of October? Anything spooky or fun? Let's have a chat in the comments down below. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.